Hi guys, and welcome to Codecademy. My name is Galina, and I'm a developer from New York. Today we're going to be covering the Ruby on Rails Innovation Cloud project. Before we get started, let's take a look at some of the concepts we'll be covering today. To complete this project, you'll need to be familiar with models, migrations, how to display data in the view, private methods within a controller, resource route, as well as the request-response cycle that we'll be using as our guide. Let's jump right in. Innovation Cloud wants to create a Rails app to collect email signups. Here's what it looks like. At the bottom of the page, when a user enters his email, right here, the email is saved into a database. Using the request response cycle as a guide, here's what we need to do for the Innovation Cloud app. In the first turn of the request response cycle, the signup form is displayed to the user. Here's the signup form, and when the user fills in the form with an email and submits it, meaning the user clicks this join button, it triggers the second turn of the request response cycle where the email data is saved into the database. Now to preview our app at any point, in the terminal we're going to type Rails S, which is Rails server, -P, which is the port, and for this particular project we're going to be using 4001 as the specific port. Now let's get started with our setup. We want to create a new Rails app named Innovation Cloud. So let's start a new session and type Rails new Innovation Cloud and enter. Now once that's done generating, we want to switch into our application folder. So we're going to use the cd or change directory command into Innovation Cloud. Awesome. Let's check off step 2 and on to step 3. Now we want to install the gems in the gem file. To do that, we're going to use the bundle install command. And once that's all done and complete, we can move on to step 4. In the root directory of the project, we've provided the base HTML, CSS, and a Ruby controller file for this project. Look at the bottom of your file navigator to locate them. Let's put their contents in the correct place in our project. Okay, so here we have our files. Now let's see what we need to create. We need to first create a signups folder with the new.html.erb file and copy and paste the contents of this new.html file. So let's select all and copy this. Now let's enter our application, app, views folder, and use these 3 dots to generate a new folder. Now that folder is signups. Once we've done that, let's enter signups and generate a new file within it. Our file is going to be called new.html.erb. Now let's enter this file and paste the contents that we've just copied from the other one. Awesome. Now we want to take the contents of thanks.html. Let's copy and generate our views pages folder. And within pages, we want to create thanks.html.erb. Now let's paste that in and save. Similarly, we want to create a pages controller and copy the contents of the root into it. So I will do this by automatically generating a controller using the Rails generate controller command. So here we see a number of files that were created, amongst which is the pages controller.rb and actually also the views pages folder that we just manually generated ourselves. So let's copy the contents of pages.rb, which is just this thanks method, and let's paste them into our new pages controller. Once that's saved, let's create our style sheets. So pages.css. Let's enter assets, style sheets, use our 3 dots to generate a new file, pages.css. Now let's take the contents of ic.css and paste them into our newly generated file. And with that, we're done with step number 4. Awesome. Now it's time to create a model. So let's generate a model named signup. Rails generate model signup. Let's check off step 5. So now you see we've created also a number of files as a result of the command. We have a signup.rb model, and we also have a migration file. And the name of that migration file is the timestamp at which it was created. So let's open that migration file in DB and add a string column called email. So inside of our table, we want to have a string column called email. Save that. As you'll notice, we have an automatically generated line of code for line 7. T timestamps adds 2 columns in our database of when our record was created and updated. Now let's check off step 6 and on to step 7. We want to run a migration to update the database with the signup model. So let's run rake db. And once we've successfully updated our database, we can move on to step 8. Now we want to add a controller and routes. Let's generate a controller named signups. Rails generate controller signups. Awesome. Now we have a number of files generated. We have our signups controller.rb, which we will be utilizing, as well as the views signups, which we manually created earlier. Let's check off step 8, and next is step 9. We've prepared a controller named pages that has an action named thanks. In the routes file, map the requests for the URL thanks to pages controller thanks action. And we will be using this route later on. So let's go to config routes, and let's use our get keyword to map the requests for the URL thanks, hashrocket, open quotes, now the name of the controller which the action is in, and the action. Now we're all done with step 9, and on to step 10. In the routes file, under the thanks route, add resources signups. This is a resource route, and it maps URLs to the signups controller's 7 standard actions. Let's recall our 7 standard actions. We have index, new, show, create, edit, update, and destroy. And in this particular application, we're only going to be using our new action, which provides a form for our user to sign up to our app. And we also create that sign up and save it into our database with this create action. Now let's go back to our project and add this line of code to our routes file. Let's save that. Now we want to run rake routes to view all of the new URLs that the resource route created. Rake routes. And now, as we've mentioned before, the routes that we want to use is the signups new route to handle get requests and the signups create route to handle post requests by saving an email to our database. And here they are. We have signups new right here. Just make that a little bigger to see. We have signups new, and we also have signups create right above. Awesome. Let's check off step 11. And let's move on to step 12. Now we want to add controller actions and views. Let's set up the signups new controller action to handle get requests. So let's navigate to our signups controller and make an action named new. So we have a new action where we create a signup object, which we will utilize in our form in the view. So inside of views signups new.html.arb under line 37, let's navigate there. Line 37. We will create a form to gather email signups. Use form for to create a form with the fields of the signup object. Now let's recall that we will be writing Ruby code inside of an HTML file, though the HTML file also has an ERB extension, so that we should be fine with that. Now let's use these symbols to indicate that we're writing Ruby code, and let's define our form for helper method with the signup object. And let's open our block with a do, or you can use opening curly braces, whichever you prefer, along with the f variable, onto which we will call other helper methods. At this point, you can use any variable you like, but f is conveniently short, so we're just going to go with that. Now let's end our Ruby line. And before we move on to the next one, here's an important part that we don't want to miss. When you want to execute Ruby code and print its value to the user, you must use an equal sign. So I'm going to add that one right there. Now our form is going to include a text field, just as we see one right here. Now text field creates a single line form field, and because our user is only entering an email, then they won't need much more than that. If we'd expect to have more content, then we can use text area instead, which supports rows and columns. Now into our text field, we expect to have a user enter their email, which will get saved into the email column in the database. And we will also have a placeholder with the word email. Now after this, we want to provide the user with a button to join and save their email to our app's database. Let's use f.submit. And the class is button. Oh, and I notice I'm missing an equal sign right here. Lastly, recall that every do requires an end. So let's add that. And we don't need the equal sign here because we're not going to be printing anything in this line. Just executing. Save. And on to the next bullet point. In the routes file, set the new action as the root route. So let's scroll down to config routes.rb and add in our root route. So let's use the root keyword, open parentheses. Now the new action is coming from the signups controller. So signups new. And let's save. Awesome. Let's start our Rails server to preview our app in the browser. In the terminal, type Rails s-p 4001 and enter. Now let's visit our localhost 4000 and see our app in the browser. Awesome. Here's our form, our email text field, and our join button. Now let's check off step 12 and move on to step 13. Now we want to set up the signups create controller action to handle post requests. In the signups controller, we want to write a private method named signup params. So let's navigate to our signups controller, and below our new action, we want to add a private method called signup params. And I'm just going to copy this code and explain it in a second. Now this line of code ensures and authorizes that a signup is required when a user utilizes our form and the allowed or permitted attribute is email. Now this is used to safely collect our data from the form and update our signup model. Next, create our create action right above. Create And here's our new sign up object. And it's going to take the sign up params as a parameter that must be satisfied. Now, if the parameters were in fact satisfied, we want to then redirect to the thanks URL. Now, this sounds like an if statement to me. So let's write if the sign up was successfully saved, then we want to redirect to thanks. Now let's not forget an end for our if statement. Save. Now we want to restart our Rails server and view the result by visiting this link. Type in an email address and submit the form. So let's cancel our server now with a Control-C and restart it. I'm going to use the up arrow and select the last command that we entered. So enter. Let's visit localhost, scroll down to our form, and enter an email. So let's do Rails is fun at codecademy.com. Join. And in the terminal, we can see that our email was recognized. Here it is. And the parameters are satisfied, and we also have a timestamp that was automatically generated for when the sign-up was created. And here it is. Awesome. Now let's move on to the next step. We want to confirm that our email was saved to the database. The Rails console is a useful tool to interact with Rails apps. We'll use it here to query the database. So in the terminal, we want to open a new tab by clicking this plus button. Switch into our apps folder, Innovation Cloud. Now we want to start the Rails console by running Rails console or Rails C. Now you've noticed we've entered IRB. IRB is a command line shell prompt for when we directly want to interact with Ruby. Now to retrieve all of the emails in our database, we're going to use signup.all. And here we have it. Our email was saved. Rails is fun at codecademy.com. It was automatically given an ID of 1 as it was the first email that was signed up, and we have a timestamp of when it was created and updated. Now let's move on to step 15. We want to sign up a few more emails through the app and use the Rails console to check that they've saved to the database. So let's enter our application and add another email. How about we do galena@hello.com. Okay, now let's check our database. And there's our second email. The ID is 2. Here's my email and the date and time of when it was created and updated. Now, if at any point we want to exit the Rails console, we can use Control-D. Let's check up step 15. And with that, we've created another Rails application. I hope this video was helpful and happy coding.